Oh, good morning. Good morning to everyone. We're just going to wait a minute for everyone to come into the call, but welcome and hope you're all having a wonderful International Women's Day week celebration. I know there's so many events going on, so thank you for tuning in with us today. I'd love to hear where everyone's from, so put something in the chat, say hello. I'm sure lots of you have got friends on the line from across the country, so put in the chat where you're from. We'd love to know who's on the call today. Okay, I'll start. I'm in Calgary. Oh, okay. We just got notice that the chat is actually disabled. So, so I apologize for that. But anyway, I'm from Calgary, and I know we've got people from across the country. So nice to have you all join us. We're just going to wait one more minute for more people to join in. And absolutely, as Stephanie has put in the chat here, that you can certainly use the Q&A for any questions that you have throughout this presentation. We are going to have a Q&A at the end of this discussion. So please make sure that you use that function. Okay, Stephanie, maybe I'll just let you give me the heads up when you'd like me to get rolling. Okay, thank you very much. Well, good morning or good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the third installment of the 2021 Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub annual conference presented in partnership with the Women's Enterprise Organization of Canada. I'm Shannon Pestun, Senior Advisor and Senior Business Advisor in Finance at the Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, or WEKH as we often like to call it. And in this role, I am leading WEKH's work in mapping Canada's financial ecosystem and helping to build programming that increases women's access to financial, social, and entrepreneurial capital. Today, we're going to be focusing on a very important topic, which is financing pathways. And for anyone wishing to listen to a live French translation, please select the interpretation button at the bottom right-hand side of your screen and choose French translation option. As we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Îyârhe Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Our regional hubs and partners across Canada similarly gather on traditional territory of many Indigenous nations who have cared for these lands since time immemorial. Let us take a moment to recognize the many traditional lands on which we are connecting today and acknowledge with gratitude and respect the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples whose footsteps were first to mark these lands. The Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub works across the country through 10 regional hubs in English and in French to share research on and resources around women entrepreneurs in Canada. Drawing on the expertise of a network that includes more than 250 organizations, we also host and support programming that highlights opportunities and best practices for women entrepreneurs, as well as the organizations that support them, like the Women Entrepreneurship Conference series. To stay up to date on news and developments, you can follow WEKH on social media. Check out the links that will be dropped in the chat box. As one who's been working to build a more inclusive financial landscape, a former banker, and now the lead at WEKH on banking and finance, I couldn't be more excited about today's topic. Financing women entrepreneurs is a necessary step to creating an equitable entrepreneurial landscape. And research continues to show that women entrepreneurs face barriers to financing at the societal, organizational, and individual level. This session will look at Canada's funding ecosystem and highlight some of the innovative models that are changing the way capital gets into the hands of women entrepreneurs. We will begin with a presentation by Dr. Ellen Farrell, Professor of Venture Capital and Entrepreneurship at the Sobey School of Business at St. Mary's University. Dr. Ellen Farrell will provide some items that will be food for thought for us on why the financing landscape is what it is particularly as it relates to us here in Canada. Then we will move on to a panel discussion that brings together thought leaders in the areas of debt and equity financing, crowdfunding, prizes and grants, and radical generosity. Our panelists will share their views on how innovative financing opportunities are building a more cohesive and collaborative financing system. Please be sure to put all of your questions in the Q&A box. We look forward to answering them at the end of this panel discussion. I'm happy at this point to introduce Dr. Ellen Farrell, Professor of Venture Capital and Entrepreneurship at the Sobey School of Business at St. Mary's University. Dr. Farrell is a scholar, a professor, an entrepreneur, an investor, a recipient of venture capital, and a creator of theory-backed action plans that advance conditions for entrepreneurs and women. Dr. Farrell is the founder of the Venture Capital Program at St. Mary's University, where students study theory, raise and manage venture grade A BC investment fund, attend BC conferences, are active participants in the region's entrepreneurial ecosystem, and host the nation's venture capital investment competition. I'm looking super forward to your presentation, Dr. Farrell, and I will let you take it away.
Hello, thank you very much. I am a big fan of the Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub. And I like the work that they're doing with the Diversity Institute out of Ryerson. It's a big contribution to the nation. I'm excited and I'm inspired actually to be here with such an august group of leaders in Canada. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'd like to spend my 10 minutes or so delivering some insights that Shannon, I think, referred to as food for thought. And these tidbits won't need to be force-fed, I think. I think you're going to find these relatively compelling and reasonable things to think about as we move forward. Let me stop and say that I would like to point out that from a banking standpoint and from a venture capital standpoint, the major lending and the major lending and the major equity areas, women are, very underrepresented. And so in looking at the traditional financial institutions, we know that women are often asked for different documentation, or they're asked for more collateral and support and things such as that. But we came across an interesting piece of research that was done not all that long ago. So it's very recent, and it's about making loan requests. Now, this is not this article was not directed at women, but the article, the research article, noted that informally, a lot of the larger type companies will have a chat with their bank manager and then decide whether to submit a request for a loan, and will kind of informally withdraw from that if they don't get the right kind of feedback on that. But across all loan requests, the largest proportion were the 39% of people who were discouraged to apply, were discouraged before even applying or talking to anybody. So this is kind of like a fear of rejection that I think has kind of important consequences for women. And, just out of preparing for a bit of a kind of a proposal of sorts, I went looking for the tools that were available for women to help themselves prepare for bank, loan applications and so on, and I couldn't find any. What I did find, were hundreds of programs on how to assist credit officers to become better credit officers. I'm happy to see that a lot of the activity that's taking place in the nation right now relates to changing the system as opposed to changing the women. And of course, this is what we refer to as, kind of systemic progress. And so we have lots of programs in the past and historically that relate to kind of, trying, why can't the women be more like men? There are a number of big studies that have their titles like that. And now we're seeing more systemic change. So programs that are starting to think about how can we change the system as it currently exists so that it is open to women. And so, and some of that relates around the COVID battle. And of course, I think a lot of this was fed by the the Me Too and the Black Lives Matter movements, which were, kind of big, momentous, worldwide types of movements that are not going to go away and I think are fueling what we're seeing take place here. I'd just like to give a little shout out to the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and they're currently in the process of developing a toolkit. And this toolkit is about how to make some observations, research-backed and practically backed suggestions of how to help systemic change. And some of these are based at a very kind of a fundamental low level, and others are kind of based on a big macro level for large institutions. So I would point out that that's a document to look forward to and will probably come in the very, very near future. Most of my expertise, all of my expertise lies on the entrepreneurship and the venture capital side. And some new research out of Boston Consulting Group and Mass Challenge indicated that in a very large study that the women-led startups kind of were able to outperform the men in terms of revenue generation, men-led startups in terms of revenue generation and investment efficiency. And so, this is not something that we hear regularly. And so it's something important to consider. Let me just show you a couple of little icons here. And so on the right-hand side of your screen, these are the two various, the revenues generated by women. This is an average across, a large number of startups from a very, very well-respected organization like Mass Challenge. We're on average generating $730,000 on a kind of a 5-year rolling basis, and the men were operating at a level of $662,000. This sounds good, but it sounds more kind of egregious as time goes on when we see that their investment efficiency is quite a bit higher than. So for every dollar that you give to a totally man-led firm, they are able to produce 31 cents in revenue. And for every dollar that you give to a woman-led firm, they're able to produce 78 cents in revenue. So this is like really, really exciting news. On the other hand, if you kind of move over to the left-hand side of the screen, we see that in the same kind of study, the women were financed at a rate of about $935,000 and the men were financed at a rate of $2.12 million. So hopefully as this knowledge becomes more available, we're going to see some changes. These are kind of like relatively recent. I would think that as time goes by, it's going to be harder and harder for kind of the traditional VC industry to ignore these kinds of things. Another great study out of Columbia looked at, if you have your little thing over on that side like I do, where I kind of see the other people on the panel there. I'm just moving it over because the icon on the right hand side shows in competition, women are asked certain kinds of questions and men are asked certain kinds of questions and so on. But they've come to realize that the questions are kind of fundamentally underneath very different, using very, very well-respected theory. And so, kind of overall, the men are being asked questions that allows them to speak in an aspirational way, and they are able to kind of accrue, on average, over a lifetime of a startup, about $16.8 million in funding. Women, on average, over the life of the startup, get more of these kind of obstacle prevention type questions and end up with a $2.3 million share of funding over the lifetime of the startup. The key here is that every kind of additional question that a person could convert from an obstacle type question into an aspirational question resulted in, well, I have it phrased here differently, but resulted in a positive incremental increase of $3.8 million. So, this is a particular sample over a particular time. It's a 7-year sample, by the way. And so, if you could lose that much if you kept getting prevention questions, but if you keep turning them around and taking that obstacle out and turning it into an aspirational question, then you could increase about $3.8 million per question. Wow, it was an exciting study to read. And so this was kind of based on regulatory focus. And so there is a major piece of work underway, which is a tool actually that's being helped using cutting edge artificial intelligence and natural language natural language processing by St. Mary's University and Volta and the Center for Women in Business at Mount St. Vincent University. And they're kind of collaborating on developing this conversion tool across the country that would help, women learn to understand the dynamics of what's going on in these events and to deal with those. Venture capital funds. There was a movement happening about venture capital funds for women. Women wanted to learn how to invest. They wanted to become, investors. And we all thought this was going to be the point at which there would be significant change. And of course it is a vital area, but you have to have so many women in a particular group, about 30% before, this is work out of Harvard, it has to be about 30% of the disadvantaged group has to be present on the floor before they can start to kind of exert their kind of natural way of engaging with something. And so having one or two token people around doesn't work. It doesn't produce the results. So having women pulling the levers as a group overall, that's a really, really great idea. On the other hand, what's even better than that is when the people pulling the levers, have a thesis directed at women. And of course, we have a number of these. Now, I refer to specifically like the 51, which is a natural group, and Sandpiper, VC out of Atlantic, which is more of a kind of a regional type group. And these are women investors investing in women. All across the, the continent, I have interviewed groups that have, an interest in investing, in helping women learn to become investors, but they weren't really investing in women. And that's where the problem is, a real problem is, and we need more of that. So more venture capital funds for and by women. So my last little tidbit for you here today is, the institutional investors are the big pension plan funds, the big insurance funds, big universities have the big endowments and so on, and they all have to put this money away in, relatively safe places for you to get back when you have a claim on your insurance or you want to retire, or universities want to draw down on these funds. And so these organizations control trillions of dollars, and they also fund much of the venture capital. And, oops, there's my little timer just telling me, hang on there. There we go, sorry about that. Kind of as an industry, these institutional investors are beginning to reconcile with the fact that most of the venture capital funds don't return very good returns. And so, their industry itself is beginning to refer to this. They kind of, get excited about the compelling theses of specific funds and so on. But imagine, what could happen if they adopted a different kind of an attitude. What if institutional investors mandated a minimum proportion of women in the VC portfolios that they're going to fund? So I recognize that this is probably a really radical notion, but on a business level, it makes sense. And so, this is something for us to begin to kind of get some insight to. And I say this because I have a whole document here. I just went back to a couple of the papers that I wrote, and I took out all the rationales that I had written over the years from other people's research about why there was no VC, very little, like 3%, and then maybe with a co-founder, maybe up to 16% of the funding was going to any startups with women in them. And, there's like a whole list of reasons why, they're kind of risk averse, and they're not suited to build big companies, and they, maybe don't have the financial acumen is one. One of the big things, the biggest reason, however, real reason, is that the mental model of a successful entrepreneur is a man. And so when women stand up to make their pitch, they're talking about their business model, they're talking about their strategic partners, but the men don't see it. We can take the same business plan and put it in front of two different, one of them is a woman, one of them is a man, we put them in front of VCs, and they always prefer, the one with the male voice. This is not just VCs, right? The world reacts this way. We can do the same thing with students in a university. You put up two CVs. One of them is a CV for a man. The other one is obviously a CV for a woman by virtue of the name. And the students will generally pick, not always, overwhelmingly pick the male person as somebody that they would like to work for. So those are kind of some of the areas that I'm thinking about. And I feel this is really important right now because I'm seeing a loss of little girls in my ecosystem. I'm seeing a loss of going out to places to try and find people to bring into classes, and I'm asking for women or girls or anybody who is starting a business that come and talk to us and help my students learn and so on. And it's becoming increasingly hard to find these women in this part of the ecosystem, in particular the venture capital area. And so I think we need more role models. And I remember this story, I like to tell it quite a bit, that when Canadian tennis phenom, Bianca Andreescu beat Serena Williams at the US Open, I guess this is a couple of years ago now, somebody pointed out to me that they told me the story, my little girl goes to tennis lessons, and there's like 10 people in the class, and after Serena beat that group of kids, Serena, he said, we went to the tennis lesson, and there were 50 little girls standing there waiting to take tennis lessons. And he said it was just like a phenomena. And of course, everybody in sports knows this, that when you get some of these great, kind of phenoms in the sport, soccer world explodes, hockey world explodes, and so on. And so the little boys and girls want to do it. We need to develop some really, really great models. Mentors are good, but mentors take a lot of energy and time between both parties, finding them, putting them together, and keeping them together. you know, one single rock star female entrepreneur, you know, with the right kind of positioning put behind it, could become the role model for thousands, hundreds of thousands of little girls. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Farrell. I really always appreciate the information that you're able to share with us. And a couple of things I took away, some words like discouraged borrowers and preventative questions. When we take a look at the impact of that, we're seeing it in the financial landscape, and we're seeing it, which translates into this investment gap of women-led businesses. The other thing that you mentioned too is just the role that stereotypes and bias play in the financing landscape. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that in the call. But you're right, we need more role models. We need to challenge the notion of what is a successful entrepreneur. And this past week on International Women's Day, WEKH released their See It, Be It campaign, which is trying to change that conversation. And we will be actually having that panel en français, I think, tomorrow. So thank you for a great presentation. We're going to now move into the panel portion of this section, and really excited, as I mentioned, we have some emerging funding models that we're going to be talking about. We have some thought leaders from various different types of financing landscapes with different lenses, and we're going to be talking about how more capital is going into the hands of women. I'm so excited to introduce Vicky Saunders, who's the founder of SheEO. I know that you were just coming off of your big conference, Vicky, so I'm going to give you the floor for a couple of minutes just to introduce yourself and say hello to our audience on the line.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Vicki Saunders, founder of SheEO. I'm up at my cottage taking a break after the summit, so I hope my Wi-Fi still works. So for those of you who don't know SheEO, we are a community of radically generous women who are here to transform how we're funding and supporting women entrepreneurs. And we do this in a pretty unique way. We come together across Canada. Cathy Bennett, who's on the panel with us today, is one of our activators. Shannon's one of our activators. I'm sure there are many more in the community here. An activator is a woman who contributes $92 a month or $1,100 a year into this shared pool. And then we loan this money out at 0% interest to women entrepreneurs who are working on what we call the world's to-do list. So critical global priorities we're facing. They're all revenue generating. So somewhere between 50K and 2 million in revenue, majority women owned, so 51% or more, women led, and working on the world's to-do list. And we started 5 years ago in Canada with this sort of radical redesign of how to do funding and ecosystem support differently. And it's now grown. We have about 3,300 activators across Canada. We've funded 53 ventures in Canada, 107 globally. We've expanded the model to 5 other countries. And, you know, it's interesting listening to Ellen's stats, and I'm like, oh my God, like we just need to radically rethink things, right? Like we've had a business case for more than 10 years showing how capital efficient women entrepreneurs are, how amazing they are at being like incredibly efficient with capital, but also incredibly resourceful. Hiring people with sustainable, like environmentally and socially sustainable jobs, eliminating waste, like just thinking from a total sustainability lens. And so we've just got a massive portfolio full of these kinds of ventures, and there's so much more. And so I'd like to see us actually radically rethink venture capital instead of just create more venture capital for women and try and fit it into the existing dialogue. I'll pass it back to the center. Thanks, Shannon.
Well, thanks, Vicki. And certainly when I think about radical generosity, it is your face that I see in the whole SheEO community that you've developed. And it's been fantastic watching this grow into a global movement. So congratulations. Dr. Amanda Williams is with us next. Amanda is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Business and Communication Studies at Mount Royal University. Amanda, I'm going to let you take it away and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. So as Shannon mentioned, I'm an assistant professor. I teach in the Faculty of Business and Communication Studies at MRU. And I actually teach on the communication studies side, but I'm interested in all of the constructions we're talking about. So these are really exciting conversations to me. I'm the faculty member. We're one of the WEKH hubs. We're the Alberta hub at MRU, and I'm a faculty member that does quite a bit of work with that hub. We recently completed some work on one of the ecosystem innovations in Alberta, so the Builder Business program. It's a rewards-based crowdfunding program. It was a small study, but I'll talk a little bit about that today. I'm also a member of the Canadian National Global Entrepreneurship Monitor team and a research fellow for the Center for Innovation Studies. And I only mention that because I also am super interested in how the things we're talking about compare to the trend data we see nationally for entrepreneurship. So I've been working with that data set now for almost 5 years, just particularly with an interest on how our trends are changing for both women and youth, two groups that tend to be marginalized for similar and different reasons.
Well, thanks, Amanda, and for all the work that the Alberta Hub is doing here. And, you know, the GEM report is something else that a lot of us from industry rely on for information. So, you know, thanks for sharing that with us as well. Cathy Bennett is up next, and Cathy is the founder and managing partner at Sandpiper Ventures. Cathy, over to you.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I've been an entrepreneur for most of my life, not just my adult life. I think my first business I opened at the age of 5, selling reused comic books so I could raise money to take my best friend who had Down syndrome to the local pool. So I'm always been an entrepreneur. Always wanted to be in partnerships or investing in others or having them invest in me. So I love the idea that collaboratively we can grow businesses. I sit on the board for BDC. I also am a former finance minister for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I think, and Ellen, I'm going to have to get you to do some research. Somebody told me I'm the only woman finance minister who also simultaneously held the status of women portfolio at the same time, which, as my colleagues told me at the United Nations when we went to represent Canada, that was a unique position of power. So I think there's something there about putting those two portfolios together. I'm a big believer that as a successful entrepreneur, I have to pay it back. And I'm hugely grateful to my mentor and my friend, Vicky Saunders, for helping me find a passion to do that with SheEO when I came out of political life. And, while, she and I will have different and varying opinions on venture capital, which I totally respect, I think in our region, Atlantic Canada, for us, having a bunch of 9 powerful women stand up and say, we're going to support women that are going to grow big, badass companies is really important for people in our region to hear. So excited to have Ellen here today, and I look forward to the conversation, Shannon, and learning from the panelists.
Thanks, Cathy, so much, and love all the great work that Sandpiper is doing, certainly following all that work, and as well your participation on Canada 51 as well. So thank you so much for joining us. And I know that you and Vicky have both had incredibly busy days, so thank you. Next on our panel, we have Ejibola Adetokunbo-Taiwo. Ejibola, welcome, and I would love to have you introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. I'm so inspired and excited to be here with all the thought leaders on this panel. Listening to Ellen makes me to remember reason why I left the 4 walls of the Canadian banks. I haven't worked at 2 of the top 5. I left the bank with the intention of working on the field and to be part of the key players when it comes to entrepreneurship. And the reason isn't far-fetched. I saw more men come to the bank to seek for my financial advice. I received more calls from businessmen who needed loans, who wanted to know more about the several funding opportunities they came across. They booked appointments to even talk about their recently bought multi-million-dollar equipment and how that would help them scale up production and revenue. But I wasn't seeing women come through the door. Particularly, I didn't see women like myself, my sisters, come to me for any sort of business advice. And that was the beginning of my curiosity. I wanted to know more. I wanted to find out what women in business were up to. How do they run their business, scale up operations? Where do they get funding from? Who serves them? Do they have a strong business structure to access available funding opportunities? I had lots of questions. And so that was when the Sedulous Women Leaders was founded. And it was founded, built on two basic mantras. First is hashtag no woman should be left behind, which is the foundation of what we do at the Sedulous Women, promoting inclusive entrepreneurship, ensuring that we understand the needs of immigrant women in business, women of color, Black women, particularly when it comes to raising capital, and to direct them to funding opportunities to help them scale up capital and operation. The second mantra which we have is see you at the top, the place where we all belong, which is the empowering piece of our work, the wrap around business advice piece, like the coaching, the training, the business mastermind, the one-on-one mentorship services. Because we know that women share, when women share inspiring story of success with another woman, it creates that level of confidence to the other to believe more in their dreams and aspirations. And we've had several successes when it comes to funding, from the creation and launch of the first of its kind grant for immigrant women in business called the Firm Immigrants, where immigrant women that are known as elevators are using their own capital to support another immigrant women-led business. And recently to co-organizing the Rise Up Pitch competition for Black women in business.
Thank you, Ejibola, and you've done some incredible work. And you and I have a very similar background, because also I was in the banking sector as well. And very much like you, I was a lender, a business lender, and I didn't have any women in my portfolio. And that was a big aha moment. And also like you, when you take a look at the intersectionality, myself, I'm a Métis woman, I didn't have any Indigenous women in my portfolio. And when you're inside the system, you say, okay, like there's a problem here. What am I going to do to solve it? And I just so applaud everything that you have done, because you've been remarkable to follow. So thank you for joining us. Last and not least, we have Anita Chang, who's Director of Member and Stakeholder Engagement over in Vancity, Vancouver. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you. And hello, everyone from Vancouver, BC. I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the unceded territories from the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nations. A little bit about myself, as Shannon had mentioned, I'm currently leading the member and stakeholder engagement team at Vancity. And part of my work, I have the privilege of engaging with some of the community partners here locally to design and deliver some strategic initiatives, and really focused around community and member impact. I'm really looking forward today to sharing a little bit about a program we've designed last year with the Unity Women's Entrepreneur Program in partnership with the Women's Enterprise Center. On a personal level, I'm deeply passionate about women entrepreneurs. Prior to joining Vancity about 11 years ago, my business partner and I started a small business here in the Lower Mainland. It's just a small healthcare clinic, which still exists today. But what I was able to experience during that time were really the trials and tribulations of running a small business as a woman, including understanding all the various ways to access capital and how I approached it versus my male counterpart or business partner. And I saw the key differences in terms of our approach and how we tackled it. So I'm looking forward today to discussing this a little bit more and engaging in some great dialogue with my fellow panelists.
Well, thank you so much and welcome. And like your fellow panelists, everyone here has got a passion for the advancement of women's entrepreneurship, particularly in the funding landscape. So we're going to dive right into it. I want to start talking about the investment that's being made in women's entrepreneurship. So the federal government has the Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy, which has seen a $5 billion investment in women entrepreneurs. We're seeing financial institutions start dedicating capital to women entrepreneurs. And we're seeing venture capital firms starting to target women through women-specific funds. I'm curious to hear from, I'm going to start with you, Ellen, just because we came off of your presentation, but where are we really making progress in this space? And I know you did cover some of the gaps, but if there's something that you want to add to that in this portion of the question, please take that away.
Right. Well, I'm of course delighted to see that money coming in, but I think Yeah, I think the federal government has to see women as a, just a different sort of industry, right? We're just like pile the money in, like, pile the money in there. Think of this as an industry that needs some, propping up. It needs some support. It's the kind of thing that is going to return trillions of dollars into the world overall, and certainly hundreds and billions of dollars into Canada overall. So continue adding that money and treat us as if we were the automobile industry or the tech sector, or if we were the health sector or whatever. Just continue to invest in what's happening, what we see going now. And the other thing I would say would be, like, I just think the variety of programs is just super important, because right now we don't really care what's going to hunt. What we want to do is just make some stuff happen. Make it happen for young women, make it happen for COVID-stricken women, make it happen for, girls in high school, make it happen for everybody. And so every organization, every federal, group, every provincial group, every municipality where they can see an opportunity to create some sort of a little program that's going to make an impact on maybe 10 or 15 girls or women. Do it. And then we'll have lots and lots of things to see what's going to work. Right. And then we can pick from those, like, SheEO. I mean, who would have thought that how beautiful an organization that would come, and how many others are out there drifting around in the minds of people. And we just need to kind of ensure that they take place. So two separate things, really. I say keep the federal money coming, because we are an industry that needs encouragement and support. And I'm all over as many different kinds of programs as we can manage.
You mentioned women sort of as an industry, and I remember someone saying once that women are a niche market. And I thought 51% of the population, you're not dealing with a niche market. So, I mean, great perspective there. Anita, just looking more from a traditional financing perspective, I'd love to hear where you think we're making progress in terms of creating a more inclusive funding landscape, and what gaps you're seeing still remain.
Good question. I feel that from a financial institution perspective, progress is being made slowly, but, the positive thing that we have to share is that there's more attention today that there's ever been at all levels, from the government, institutions, and local community, that we're rallying behind together to figure out how can we support women entrepreneurs out there, and understanding that the current models that exist right now still exclude specific groups, right? And yes, COVID has exacerbated this, which is devastating, but at the same time, it's pushed this need to the forefront and drawn attention to it. From the gaps perspective, from a financial institution, we're still heavily regulated, in which unfortunately still limits in terms of the creativity from financial institutions of how innovative we can be with the models. We at Vancity, of course, has been built on from the founding, from the very beginning, in terms of inclusivity. We were founded back in 1946, where the credit union came together because a small group of 14 citizens locally couldn't get financing met by existing banks. Also some interesting facts about Vancity is that the first loan that we made at Vancity was $100 to a woman. And in 1960s, we were the first financial institution to provide mortgages to women without a male cosigner. But, in terms of inclusivity, that is what the principles we are founded by. But yet, we have over the years developed some great programs to think through the different models, but yet we are challenged from a funding perspective, definitely from a regulations perspective. But there are creative ways that we're leaning into it that I can share a little bit more later.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, you raised some really interesting points here, because there's the system, and I guess this is what, you know, Ellen, you were mentioning earlier, is that we have some systemic barriers that, you know, from when you're trying to work from change from within, you still have to confront those. I love the fact that Vancity, the first loan went to a woman. I wonder how many other financial institutions could say the same. But I mean, you just mentioned like 1960 was the first time a woman didn't need a co-signer. Like, this is 60 years ago. I mean, this is pretty still recent when you think about the whole system. And I often think that, you know, our financial system in Canada was created in the 1800s, and it was just never designed with women in mind. And it's just no longer reflective of the system that we live in, which sort of brings me to my next question. This one's going to go to all of you. And Vicki, I'm going to start with you. But what role, if we take a look at ourselves, so we've got people from multiple disciplines in financing here. So consider this more of the ecosystem, the financing ecosystem approach. But what role does the financial industry as a whole play in shaping a more a more inclusive financial landscape? And what steps do you think need to be taken to get that sense of unity? Vicki, I'll start with you, please.
Sure, thanks. So I'd like to just start by saying that systems are created by people. Right? It's not some like thing over here that can't be changed. It's like, we made it up, we can change it. So I just like to give monster-sized kudos today to BMO. So Bank of Montreal has been in deep relationship with SheEO from the very beginning since we started. There are all kinds of regulations that make things hard to change and to do, but BMO just matched SheEO's terms so that we could double the number of ventures funded this year at 0%. So they found a way to do this in the system that is impossible to do, if you ask anybody, including themselves, a couple of years ago. But they just they looked at the landscape, and we're just never going to change this unless we change our process and find a will within the organization to change things. So I just like, the door is open now. Let's push through it, and let's get everybody else acting differently, because they can if they choose to. So I think we just have a moment in time right now. We have just seen women massively disproportionately impacted during COVID. This is our future. It will be 1,000 times worse if we don't do things differently. And so it takes some courage to step into that. It takes people that are in relationship who start from a place of trust. As I mentioned before, we have so much data to show women pay their debts, and together we can really transform our systems. And so this is a real coming together moment. I'm so excited about it. And I'd like to see lots more financial institutions jump in.
Great points there, Vicki, and agree. We have a moment in time here, and I think that the energy, and this is what we're seeing from different parts of the financial sector. I want to put it back to Anita, because you just brought into, you know, let's see more financial institutions coming on board. So Anita, I'm going to ask you the same question, but what role do you see the financial industry as a whole? What role are we playing in creating a more inclusive system, and what needs to happen?
Vicki, thank you for sharing in terms of what BMO, and that's exactly the movements that are going to take in terms of rallying between, you know, when we see big institutions take those systemic changes and change their policies and be creative in their thinking, it pushes everybody else around that and rallies everyone and moves everyone in the same direction. So that's great. And that's how we're seeing it locally at Vancity as well. You know, financial institutions, they hold the power of money. And through the systems that we've created, the people, as you've mentioned, that created, can control how much capital gets into the hands of the people who actually need it, right? And so we've seen over the years that it's slowly being addressed, and the traditional systems are built over time, honestly, to exclude specific groups, whether it's, you know, the process, the regulations, and we need to challenge the system to understand how to be more inclusive. And we need to look at those communities that are underserved, whether it's, you know, women is one, BIPOC businesses, LGBTQ, 2S, you know, people with diverse abilities. And Vancity, how we do it is that we listen very closely to the communities. We stay connected with your community partners. We work also at the government level, policy level, to think, how can we evoke change with the finance ministers? How can we look at it from the perspective at the regulation levels in order to build solutions to do that? But the progress is a bit slow, but you know what? We're seeing movement in that front.
Anita, I really appreciate how you just talked about this is a system, but no one industry or no one partner in the system can change it. The relationship to government, to policy, to education, to the financial system, it takes everyone coming. The civil society, I think a lot of the enterprise centers as well are doing a lot of lobbying around this as well. Like everyone plays a role in it. Anita, I know you're not directly in the financial system, but you might have an interesting take here as well in terms of what role industry plays in shaping a more inclusive environment. And from your perspective, what are you seeing needs to happen?
You know,
oh, sorry, I meant Amanda, Anita. I'm sorry. Sorry, I meant Amanda on that one.
I did think you meant me. We're the A team, so you know it can be confusing there. You know, I think some things I see in the work that I do, and just what I'm hearing here is just it's that desire to be innovative, to look for different solutions, to sort of ask for forgiveness, not permission at times. And I also think a huge part of that's what I've seen in my work with WEKH is just sharing those success stories and getting them out there, because those are reminders that it can be done, right? And if we don't give front and center to some of those new stories, we're not going to tackle some of the structural constructs that feel so real, but as Vicki noted, are simply social constructions. And I think for the banking industry, it's about being reflexive. Constantly checking, having metrics in there where you measure your progress there, checking your implicit bias. I had a fascinating conversation. I had a loans officer come speak to my class just about how they'd taken training. They themselves were a woman. They felt they did a good job, and then they continued to watch video on themselves, and they defaulted to all these patterns that did not serve women as well. So again, it's being mindful of the questions we ask, the criteria we set. And I think imagery plays a huge role. Again, sharing different stories. The banks can communicate in a different way. They can highlight those stories that help shift that narrative. So, you know, someone's not sitting there going, I'm not even going to bother applying because I don't see myself in this space. So again, we cannot underscore the importance of those stories, and that's why the See It, Be It campaign, and that is such a key pillar to the work WEKH does, and such an important one. And we need to expand that list. We need it to be so huge that there's so many options that, you know, that it's not even a question to try to find incredible, inspiring people that can show those innovations and be reflexive like that.
Yeah, you just brought up See It, Be It. I'd love to see a See It, Be It campaign on how she got capital, because I think women, we just don't talk enough about how they get capital, and learning from one another would be really important there too. Cathy, I'm going to throw this question to you as well, obviously with it through the venture capital lens that you have. But what does the system need to do to become more inclusive? And what's your take on this?
I think there's a whole bunch of ways I define the system, but if you think about like two sides of the transaction, just kind of bring it down to its basic level, you know, we've got to get a whole lot more women on the side of where money is going, right? So the decision making, whether it's my money, my institution's money, my government money. So women in the decision-making roles, whether it's our personal wallets or other treasuries that we have responsibility for, we need a lot more women there. And we need to respect the fact that there's a whole lot of women who want to be there, who have to learn how to do that and want to learn how to do that. And if you leave them on the sideline, not allowing them to participate, then you're never going to get them there. So it's, you know, the See It, Be It has applicability on that side of the transaction. It's one of the reasons why I really, really value SheEO. I mean, it was inspirational to so many women to step into an investment platform that allows them to learn and understand about all these great ventures. On the opposite side, you have the founders who are accepting the investments. And I think what we need to continue to do is to understand that if you've never raised capital before, you know, to Ellen's point earlier, I mean, you know, women are known for over-researching everything we do, right? I mean, As a matter of fact, not only do we as individuals over-research and over-plan what we do, but we also as a collective global entity now of women. I mean, women's economic advancement is one of the most researched things we're doing in the world right now. But I think there's an opportunity for us to help women take that research or that need to learn into understanding what the institutions are, where the barriers are broken, and getting them more prepared to asking for the capital in a more confident, not a more confident way, but a more way that understands the barriers that they're going to face. Now, I don't think women should have to change. I don't think the solutions are all about fixing women, but I think we need to explain those two sides of the money transaction. Now, if I can go one step further, Shannon, we talk about the systems, right? There's the two sides of the transaction, and then there's the rules and regulations that lie over that. And one of the things that I learned as finance minister, and while I'm so excited that we've got a female finance minister in Canada, is that, the rules and regulations, government can change. Like I remember the day that somebody came into my office as finance minister here in Newfoundland, Labrador, and I said, I don't understand why it is like this. And, my senior staff person said, well, you're the minister, you get to change the law. Like, that's the most powerful thing that we can do, is understand that the system is also created by the regulatory framework that is driven by government regulations, whether they're provincial or at a federal level. So, we can do what we can do with both sides of the transaction. And then we have to have decision makers in those roles that can change the regulatory framework.
Great answer, and lots in there to think about. I want to just kind of build on this, because we're talking about breaking systems and we're talking about changing the rules, and it does take trailblazers to be able to do that. And so, it's as civil society, we have the opportunity as well to be influencing government. I want to also take a look at how some of these emerging models are helping women access more funding. So Cathy, I want us to just kind of go back to you, but let's talk about, we're seeing a rise in accelerator programs, a rise in women-focused funds. How are these breaking down some of the barriers and changing the way the system has given capital to women?
Yeah, so I think it's putting, we have a teeny number of women that are investing as angels, right? 2%, I think, in Canada. So I think what you're seeing is, if I've been at a practical level and, an activator with SheEO, I might think about being an angel, but which, by the way, I've been a part of an angel fund in Newfoundland, Labrador for like 8 years, and done my own individual or as a group investing. But if you've never done that before, right, and you don't have a community to do it with, it's difficult to kind of step in that world. I think what we're seeing is, an acceleration of women wanting to support women to learn, and as a result, I want to champion every single woman that works at BDC, for example, who's brave enough, to talk about some of the great things that they want to see on the agenda for BDC, while also equally celebrating, for example, that we have a Women in Tech Fund there. There's an opportunity for us to not just collaborate in our own communities, but there's also an opportunity for us to collaborate inside organizations, whether they're government institutions or they're accelerators, which, a practical example, Shannon, we had a tiny, in the context of the Canadian ecosystem, a tiny but mighty accelerator here in St. John's, Newfoundland, the Genesis Center, who went from 0% of their companies as women-led to almost 30% in 18 months. Now, to me, that's the power of, if we're all working on the same problem together, how fast we can make change. And I mean, you think about how aspirational Vicki was in raising a perpetual fund that's so enormous. I remember sitting at a coffee shop with her talking about it, and I said, Vicki, we're never going to do this. Like, this is so big. But if you can take it apart in small bits and pieces, SheEO has been a fantastic example to us all of what's possible if we work together.
I'm going to move right into SheEO. And Vicki, I saw that you had unmuted yourself at the last question, so maybe you can still bring that forward in this question. But let's talk about then how SheEO Ventures is helping women move through the whole funding continuum and helping them access other sources of financing. Where are you seeing the biggest impact with SheEO in opening up more funding for women?
Yeah, I mean, our design is really holistic. So funding is one part of it. The learning piece is another part of it, the mindset around what kinds of businesses we want to run. So yeah, Cathy and I have like a good little back and forth going on this, the VC thing as well, partly because there is a playbook attached to VC, which has, you know, certain milestones in mind of what it wants to do in the world. And it's important that like all kinds of funding have a playbook attached to them, all of them. And so if you don't know what that is, you need to like actually research that to make sure that you're signing up for the kind of thing that you want to build the kind of business you want. So I would say like the greatest impact I feel we're having is that we're funding women on their own terms. We're not setting the playbook. They apply and they say what they want to do with their businesses, and we vote for that or not as a collective. And so I truly believe that everything is upside down in the world, exactly the opposite of what it should be. And so like the people that should be on stage are the innovators with great ideas that have solutions to create a better world, not the people with money. It's like super, super backwards. We should all be like blessing those people that step off the cliff to go create a better world. That's what we need to be celebrating, not the next billionaire, yada, yada. Like there's just concurrent multiple challenges coming at us. I mean, I think the thing that I wanted to just circle back around with was really, you know, yay for the government for the women's entrepreneurship strategy. Let's hope that there's a West 2 coming. Add a 0, please, to the number from last time, because the return on investment is so significant for investing in women entrepreneurs. We invest the majority of all the money that comes our way into our communities instead of into our pockets and buying another house. And so I think like we really juice economies that way. And I'd love to see a 51% bar on this one, which is women-led, women-owned ventures are getting this capital, not and when I say women-led, like women CEO or founder or SheEO, whatever you want to call yourself. I think, you know, a bunch of the money in that first round that was direct investment went to, you know, one woman on a team of 6. That's not okay. We need to really set this 51% bar.
Thank you, Vicki. I want to move over to Amanda because when we think about emerging funding models, crowdfunding is certainly something that we're seeing more of. And in fact, it's the only source of financing where we're seeing women outperforming in against traditional models. So Amanda, how is crowdfunding playing a role to help women not only validate their ideas, but launch and grow their companies?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really interesting space. I found it a very interesting space as a researcher too, because again, it tells a different story. But it's not so different from even what I'm hearing now, right? Women are good at doing a lot of these things that we're not giving them credit for. And, you know, crowdfunding is really, and particularly rewards-based crowdfunding, you know, PwC did a landmark study a few years ago, and they showed, you know, women always outperformed their male counterparts. And, you know, I was fascinated by that because, again, that wasn't the script that I knew about access to capital. And then when we looked at the literature, we found it really interesting because it was sort of like, this is a different space. This is a different medium. It changes up those scripts and challenges some of these things. And some of the things that we saw why women did a better job is they were better at setting their targets. They were better at being realistic. They were better at doing their research and communicating to their crowd what they were doing. They were better storytellers, right? So again, when you think about what works in an online format, it's really interesting because it is not the typical business plan. The thing that appeals to the crowd is very different than some of those biases that typical you know, loan officers might see. And you know what, when you do your research and you set measured targets, you build trust with the crowd in a very different way. And then the other thing that we continuously saw, and again, researchers who were studying things like, you know, Indiegogo and Kickstarter were surprised. They were controlling for gender. They weren't expecting to see women, you know, doing so well. And again, another thing was they talk about it as sort of this activist choice homophily, where women are choosing to support other women. And we had like we did a smaller study on the Build Her Business initiative in Alberta. And, you know, we had a respondent say, you know, once we lean in, we lift up. And it's one of my favorite quotes that emerged from that research because it's just a different approach to to businesses. And it speaks beautifully to what Vicki was saying in terms of the fact that we're not celebrating that lifting up. We're celebrating the money and the capital acquisition. And again, you know, in crowdfunding, we see women, they're able to validate their product in a really low risk manner. They get immediate feedback on their offering. You know, should they stay the course? Should they pivot? But, you know, it went beyond that. We saw increased knowledge and confidence. They were able to test their business ideas, learn how to run social media campaigns, and just develop a whole set of skills in planning in a timed sort of way that they carried to their business ventures. So those were some really great things. And then more importantly, and I think this is an important part of it, is I love that we talk about this in terms of economic terms, but we found that's not how our participants talked about it. They started with those social terms, and they started with the, we can change the world, we can make it a better place, we are motivated to build each other up, right? We often start with the, this is what women will contribute to the GDP. And you know, a lot of the time what our participants said is it's really not about how much money we're making, it's about what we can do for our community and for each other. To change the world. And again, the GEM data shows that those motivations do have a gendered component as well. So making that social impact it's just a different motivation and driver.
Yeah, really interesting insights in there. And I love the notion of lifting each other up and actually following the campaigns too. I really did see participants lifting each other up, supporting each other's campaign. And I would agree with you that there was a social drive to this ahead of the economic side for these women. And yet, again, they're still outperforming and their male counterparts. I want to, at this time, just bring into the conversation, I want to be able to speak about, because we're talking about lifting up, Ejibola. You were pivotal behind Rise Up Challenge most recently, and you've also created the first immigrant grant. I want to talk about the important role that grants and prizes play, because I don't think they get enough airtime in being able to have that as a validating point for these women who are running successful businesses and helping them get into mainstream financial that whole mainstream financial pathway. So talk to us, if you can, about the importance of grants and prizes and what you're seeing and how that is helping more women get capital into their hands. Ejibola.
Thanks for that question. See, in recognition of the crucial role that capital play in the success of any business, and in realization of the barriers that women face in accessing funding opportunity, there is a need to have an inclusive funding opportunity. And when I say inclusive, what I mean is, you know, taking cognizance of the startup businesses of less than 3 years, of the over 3 year to 5 year, because these businesses are the ones to watch for the future. I know Vicki was saying, you know, we need to be more aware of the creatives and the innovators, because these are the ones that are creating amazing products that would change and bring about a better world. So it's becoming essential for us to realize that there are businesses out there that are created on the creativity and innovativeness we see in our modern day. As such, what some of them need is a little push in scale-up capital to get to the next stage of growth for their small business. You will be amazed, Shannon, at what 5,000, 10,000, 20, 25 grants can do. And a good testimony to that was, you know, when we launched the firm Immigrant, we had 148 applications for a $5,000 grant. And when we went aggressive nationally with the Rise Up pitch competition, we had over 700 applications for a $10,000 grant in 8 categories of award. What this shows is that we're beginning to see more women venture into businesses, women coming up with great ideas, women interested in building up companies. It also shows that we have a lot of women in need of the scale-up capital. And we've got to be there to give that support that is needed to help them scale up production, to help them design a solid business structure that can stand the test of time, giving them the mentorship that can help them accelerate growth and to discover further expansion opportunities. like diversified markets and global expansion. Making available non-financial prizes and grants is actually an effective tool to uncover businesses that have the potentials to grow rapidly, to uncover businesses that that have that export tendencies, to uncover business ideas that can solve a national problem when taken to market, to help business women further validate their business idea, to break down barriers to financial capital, and also to uncover businesses whose success is simply based on referral to the right source of support. For instance, a great tech idea that wins a $10,000 grant has given the organizers of that grant an opportunity to uncover the potential in that business, and they can make a good referral to, for instance, a technology development advisor at the Regional Innovation Network to access further funding from Alberta Innovates. Such a business could, in future, based on their growth success, start thinking of equity crowdfunding or pitching before business innovators, venture capitalists for increased round of funding opportunities. So from the scenario that I just painted, you could see that the level of growth opportunity that is available, starting from just a little amount of grants given out, it could take that little business to greater growth opportunity. It actually takes a whole ecosystem to bring about the desired growth and economic development we hope to see, particularly for women in business. We need to be inclusive of the smaller businesses, the micro businesses, because they are the future. We can't leave them behind. They've got too much potential for us to ignore them. We've got to carry them along. We need their success as much as we need the successes of the bigger businesses.
I love, everything that you just said. I think you're getting some great comments here, even from your fellow panelists. And we take a look at the landscape of women entrepreneurs in Canada. Most of them are micro businesses. And we know that most businesses actually start with less than $5,000, women-led businesses. And so there's a huge opportunity here, as you say, to focus on that demographic. And the pitch competitions, I think, do a really great job there. And in fact, the Women's Enterprise Center just released a report, I think it was this week or last week too, that, the headline #1 takeaway was small loans make a big difference. And I think, wake up, to all the funders, like the whole funding system, to be able to say there is something really important here. And actually, Anita, I'm going to pass this one to you, because let's talk about the role of micro grants and micro loans and how they're helping women. And this is an area where I think Vancity has done a remarkable job. I'll let you maybe speak to the Unity program here.
Great. Thank you, Ejibola, for kind of mentioning about the small amounts of lending. So we have a microfinance program at Vancity we've developed a number of years ago, just to the point that, small funding is sometimes what women just need to start up. And this smaller amounts of capital is from $1,000 up to $50,000. But, it's those that we provide lending to those who don't typically qualify for traditional loans. And this program itself looks at it looks beyond credit. It takes into account someone's character, cash flow, education, family support systems to help adjudicate the loan. So it's a different way in terms of the funding model to provide access to capital to people who need it. However, the program that we developed for the Unity Women's Entrepreneur Program did not approach the lending side from a microfinance lens. Because at that time, when we launched it back in June, during the heat of COVID, in some sense, we felt that women needed a greater need for more funds. So, at that time, the Women's Enterprise Center, who issued out that report on International Women's Day, reached out to us. And, we knew that women were disproportionately affected at that time. And given, all the businesses, the retail, the hardest hit businesses, tourism, food and accommodations, hospitality, were higher proportion who were led by women led businesses, right? And so they approached us to talk about, what can we do together to address the greater needs that neither one of us could address individually. So together, we actually built a women's entrepreneur program, and we mirrored a product that we had at Vancity early on in COVID, which was, term loans up to $150,000 with 0% interest in payments for 6 months. You know, in addition to this funding component, we talked with Women's Enterprise Center is that we want to look at, you know, servicing women holistically, thinking it's not just about funding, it's all about the wraparound services too, especially during COVID, where people needed advisory support, coaching, mentorship, education and support during a time of, you know, really uncertainty and knowing where people were going or how the industry was taking off at that time. So we launched the program in June. And interestingly enough, we had really great response. You know, we had 400 inquiries by the third month. But honestly, although the response was great, our ability to desk those deals were quite low. And it was so low to the fact that we needed to understand clearly there were barriers to the application process, barriers to the process, and barriers to our funding model. So it was interesting that, you know, during that time, we found that many applicants who needed support didn't qualify. We had a 2-year, you know, minimum requirement to be in business. And that wasn't the case of these startups in some sense, you know, especially businesses that wanted to start up during COVID and found opportunities to do so. Other things that we found, which was actually validated through the Women's Enterprise Center report, was that the application process was quite long and tedious. We had a 9-page application process. So a lot of this feedback that came in, you know, allowed us in the later part of last year to really look back at our lending policies and see how we can remove the barriers. You know, a lot of people who came to us as well didn't need a $150,000 term loan. And that, to some sense, was a barrier to say, I don't want to take on so much, you know. And so we looked at it, and the way we tweaked our program is that we actually went from 1 product down to 2, in which we provided more of a lower level amount of lending through a, you know, line of credit up to $20,000. And, you know, we changed the time frame that they had to be in business from 2 years to 6 months for a startup. And then, of course, for the term loan, we looked at it from the perspective of those in the growth phase to think, okay, instead of 2 years in business, you could be 1 year in business. And we actually looked at some of the process as well in terms of how people applied. And it's only been 2 weeks in the time frame in which we've launched the program, and we've seen definitely and desk more deals in that time than we have during the initial launch. So progress has been made. We've looked at our policies. We've heard from the community what is needed. But at the same time, I want to share, this is a work in progress. We're constantly leaning into hearing what's coming back from them and trying to service their needs as we go.
Thank you, Anita, and thanks for sharing too that at some point you had to pivot because what you thought you were bringing to market didn't work. And I think there's nothing, you know, it's a testament to the, I think, the customer obsession in this, which is looking at creating more mechanisms for women that support women. Sometimes we have to pull back and try again. I want to ask one last question before we get into the audience question. I think that where I want to take this one is really looking at the impact that women are having investing in other women-led enterprises. And I think, you know, Cathy, Vicki, Amanda, each of you are going to have a very interesting perspective here on the importance of helping women deploy their capital to support other women-led businesses. Cathy, can I start with you to comment on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, we are going to see an unleashing generational of wealth that is, you know, in the treasuries and wallets and purses and mutual funds and pension plans associated with women, right? So if we're not able to, as a society, wrap ourselves around those women who are going to have this access to capital and help them understand what's out there for them to deploy their capital, then we have a massive missed opportunity. And my experience, SheEO, angel network work, both through, you know, work that I've done in pulling together partnerships to support women in business in Atlantic Canada, is that you only need to ask, right? And the curiosity of women to run towards this type of support for other women is intuitive. We want to do it. We just need to know how. And I think that's the piece that we all collectively need to understand as this wealth is becoming more and more available.
Thank you, Vicki. I'm sure you've got something to add there too about how you're seeing women use their funds to support others and talk about the radical generosity. Can you all hear me? Did we just lose Vicki? Okay, Amanda, I'm going to move it to you. If you can help us take a look at that from what you saw in the crowdfunding and seeing how women are using, their dollars to invest in other women entrepreneurs.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So again, we talked about it, we framed it when we were sort of going to the literature in terms of this notion of, activist choice, homophily. There's this idea that women are attracted to other businesses. They want to support each other. There was a huge desire. There was a comment in the Q&A though that I think is really important as well. It said, like, the one thing with crowdfunding is it puts that onus on the women themselves, right? There's a lot of pressure. So it sort of takes away some of that support that that institution should be giving and some of those kinds of things. So I want to say that's why, even if it's embedded in a program like Build Our Business, where the women are developing some skills that they will carry with them. They're developing a community, they're developing a network. It was really wonderful in our interviews just to hear how impactful these experiences were for the women, how they wanted to continue to mentor each other in the building of their rewards. They got really excited about the idea of sort of partnerships. They saw their businesses in really different ways. And sometimes it was also great learning for them to say, this isn't quite the match I want, but they really, it was just a really wonderful community that was created. And I'm still on the Facebook group and I watch it and I love the way the women support each other. They come back from old campaigns and support the women who are currently in the new ones and give advice. And again, there's no financial gain for them doing that. It's because they believe in each other and they believe in the importance of building each other up. And I think that's just really, really powerful. But I think we also need to be careful with something like crowdfunding. It is not the panacea for solving access to capital. And that's one thing that made us a little anxious in our research. It was sort of like, the banks might say, see, we've done our part. Look what we're doing for women, right? And we need to be really careful about that because they're not doing enough of their part, or we wouldn't continue to hear the stories about women getting denied loans, loan officers. I've been working on an agricultural project, and some of these women who are running these farms say, well, I send my husband, even though he's not running the business and he's not doing it because we will get a better outcome. And those stories, they need to stop. That should not be what's going on. So again, yeah, I think, we need to be mindful. And that's why I think a discussion about venture capital, where we're seeing some of those big gains, becomes important as well.
Thank you, Vicki. I know we lost you there for a moment, but the question is looking at how are women using their own capital to invest in women-led businesses, and what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, we really designed this experience as a sort of like dip your toe in, small amount of money. You go through a process of selecting ventures, so it demystifies the whole thing. And it also reminds you that nobody knows how to pick winners. No one knows how to do this. It's about trusting and reaching in and trusting your intuition and doing this together in relationship. And the hope was, as you voted for these ventures and you saw them grow and you were part of that and you were amplifying their stories online or becoming customers, you'd be like, wow, this is an incredible business. I've watched her execute for a year. I wonder if she needs more capital. Could I help her? And this is our way of talking about investing, like taking the word investing out. It's more about supporting one another. And so we're now seeing women in our network, our activators, become investors in these ventures in relationship with the ventures on their own terms. It's deeply meaningful to use your capital to create the kind of world that you want to. I think this is really what's missing in this sort of transactional approach to which we approach a lot of investing these days. It's very much like you walk in, what do I get? And it's not a reciprocal give take necessarily. I'm not saying this blanket statement, I mean, but that is in general what I felt in this space. And so wanted to design an experience so it could be different. And it's like a privilege to invest in these ventures as opposed, like it's quite a special kind of experience. And so in Australia, they call us the gateway drug to investing. I don't know if there's like a more positive way to talk about this. I don't want to be known as the gateway drug, but just recognizing that a deeply relationship-based approach and understanding where value is created and what we want our communities to look like. I think this will heal all of us. We have healing work to do as women around money. We have to move from this place of scarcity, thinking we don't have enough, to really, like, every single day, we have such power. As women, we're making 80% of purchasing decisions, like every single day. Buying off Amazon is making the dude richer and creating more inequality in the world. Like, what if we had scaled up alternatives in our own communities that we're funding? What if we looked at, every time you make a decision to buy from X, you're not necessarily buying from a woman who looks like Ejibola, right? Like, these are, where do you want wealth to be transferred in the world? We have enough for everyone. And so I think of it very much from this lens of, money is nutrients for the communities. And how can we share that in a more equitable way to create a benefit for all?
Thank you, Vicki. Look, I'm just going through the questions in the chat, and as per usual, this conversation is so robust. I didn't even get to the questions. I apologize, because there's some really good ones in here. I want to offer one from Petra, who writes, thousands of women entrepreneurs don't own a home, car, or have an RSP to risk, or are single. It's hard to get a loan. What policy ideas do we need? So this is really looking at around collateral. So what sort of policy ideas do we need to consider to mainstream cash flow or character-based lending programs? Does anyone want to take a quick stab at that? This will be our only question. I'm sorry for the other ones that came through. We will get answers for you. Feel free to put your email somewhere so that we can get back to you on that. I do apologize. I lost sight of time from this great conversation. But anyone want to address Petra's question? It's a big one. It's a Vicki?
No collateral.
Okay.
No collateral. If you want to develop an underdeveloped part of your economic ecosystem, you don't expect collateral for micro money. That is, that's a simple action.
Yeah, I think Windmill Financial is doing this as well. At Windmill Lending, I put the link in the chat. Claudia's incredible organization that she's running around this kind of stuff. And I also just want to say, like, I put this in the chat too, but in case people didn't see it, we're really between worlds, right? Like, this old way of doing things, the way we've done this in the past, this inequality that's like left out so many people, is dying. It's palliative care. Goodbye to the old system. And there's a new one being birthed. And like, banks will not look the same way in 5 years. A lot of our institutions aren't going to look the same way because there's so many innovators coming up in the fintech space. There will be so much innovation happening. And governments are on notice around this stuff from regulatory perspective too. I know that Cathy's doing a lot of great work at BDC to shift that organization as well. Like, there's just so much more that we could all be doing. So I feel quite optimistic about this, even though it feels pretty painful right now. There's a lot of people are saying systemic and root causes in sentences now. Nobody talked about that 5 years ago, right? Like, where it's kind of, it's exciting.
Yeah,
so.
I couldn't agree with you more on that one. And I'm sorry to those whose questions we did not get to in today's conversation. And looking at the time, we are at the end of our session. I really want to give a huge thanks to our panelists and to everyone who tuned in today. This was such a robust conversation. We could spend hours in this. I wanted to dive so much deeper. I had questions too that I wanted to get to and just couldn't. So thank you to Vicki, Amanda, Cathy, Ejibola, and Anita for sharing your valuable insights and experiences as our panelists. Ellen, thank you so much for your insightful presentation that kicked us off. I want to call everyone's attention to stay tuned because we have two other events tomorrow that are going on. The first is the Funding Black Futures, Navigating Support for Black Entrepreneurs. In this session, we're going to be learning more about WEKH's research on Black women's entrepreneurship and review existing and upcoming funding supports available to Canadian Black entrepreneurs from Innovation Canada. That's going to begin tomorrow at 11 a.m. I'm assuming that's Eastern, but I'm going to go with Eastern. And the link to register will also be dropped in the chat box. We are also hosting the French version of the See It, Be It campaign, celebrating successes and overcoming obstacles in the Francophone community tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern with a whole new lineup of speakers and presenters. So check out that registration link as well. To learn more about See It, Be It, and to nominate an entrepreneur, this is so important. We got to keep rising. We got to keep lifting others. So nominate an entrepreneur that you know. Check out the website that is also going to be dropped in the chat box. And up in the conference series is the Ecosystem Progress and Challenges, where we're going to be reviewing the evolution of the women's entrepreneurship ecosystem, discuss some of the challenges, celebrate achievements, and ask the critical questions, where do we go from here? It will be chaired by our very own Dr. Wendy Sukiye, founder of the Diversity Institute, WEKH's academic director and professor at the Ted Rogers School of Management. You're not going to want to miss this one. The session is going to take place at 11 a.m. Eastern on March 17th, and you can learn more at the registration link, which will be dropped in the chat box. A lot of things going on in the chat box. And don't forget to follow us, follow WEKH on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and on Instagram. Just do a quick search for WEKH, W-E-K-H, and you will find us there. That's all for today. I'm almost out of breath. I look forward to seeing you all on the 17th. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Take care.